The blood-streaked sunset painted Whispering Creek's dusty Main Street as Wilhelmina Foster stumbled from the stagecoach, her face half hidden beneath a veil that couldn't fully conceal the purpling bruise around her left eye. The small Colorado mining town hardly seemed like a refuge, but after 3 days of hard travel from Denver, in a place far from Richard Coleman's reach felt like salvation. "Miss, your valise," the driver called, tossing down her single bag with little ceremony before turning his attention to the mail parcels. Wilhelmina Willa, to the few she trusted, clutched the worn leather handle, her gloved fingers trembling despite the warm June evening of 1878. She had exactly $23 to her name sewn into the hem of her dress and nowhere to go. The respectable boarding house at the end of the street might take her in if she could afford their rates. Otherwise, her options were grim, you knew, in town. The voice behind her was deep, measured, with the unhurried cadence of someone who chose words carefully. Willa turned, instinctively taking a step back. The man before her stood tall in worn leather boots, trail dust coating his denim pants and faded blue shirt. A badge glinted on his chest. Deputy Marshal, she noted with both relief and apprehension. Law meant protection, but it also meant questions she couldn't afford to answer. "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her eyes lowered. "Just arrived." "Isaac Blackwood," he offered, not extending his hand, sensing her wariness. "Deputy Marshal, we don't get many unaccompanied ladies stepping off the coach without someone waiting." His tone held no judgment, only quiet observation. Willa's heart hammered. She'd hoped to slip into town unnoticed, to find work and disappear into anonymity before Richard's telegrams could reach this far. The last thing she needed was the law's attention. "Wilhelmina Foster," she replied, deciding truth was safer than lies, at least about her name. "I'm seeking employment. I heard the silver mines have brought prosperity to Whispering Creek." Deputy Blackwood studied her with eyes the color of weathered sage. His gaze lingered momentarily on the edge of her bruise visible beneath the veil, but he asked nothing of it. "Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house might know of positions suitable for a lady," he said finally. "First night's lodging is $2. Tell her Isaac sent you and she'll not turn you away even at this hour." Willa nodded, relief washing through her. "Thank you, Deputy, Miss Foster." He tipped his hat and stepped back, clearing her path to the boarding house. "Whispering Creek is mostly peaceful, but if you need assistance, my office is beside the Mercantile." As she walked away, Willa could feel his eyes on her back, not lecherous or threatening, but watchful. It unsettled her how easily he'd noticed her, how quickly he'd assessed her situation. Men like Richard had taught her that male attention always came with a price. Mrs. Sullivan, a round-faced widow with iron-gray hair twisted into a severe bun, asked few questions beyond whether Willa could pay. The room was sparse but clean: a narrow bed, washstand, and small writing desk beneath a window overlooking the backyard garden. "Breakfast at 6, Mrs. Sullivan informed her. "No gentlemen callers, no liquor, no coming in after 9. Deputy vouched for you, but I run a respectable house." Alone at last, Willa removed her veil and hat, wincing as she touched her tender cheekbone. The mirror above the washstand revealed what she already knew: her once pretty face marred by yellowing bruises, her left eye still swollen. At 24, she looked a decade older, weariness etched into features that had once drawn admiring glances. 3 weeks ago, she'd been housekeeper to Denver businessman Richard Coleman, a widower whose reputation for philanthropy concealed a monstrous private nature. When his advances turned to assault and her refusals to violence, she'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and the money she'd been saving for years. Willa leaned against the wall, tears threatening. She'd thought Denver far enough from St. Louis and the family that had cast her out. Now she was running again with fewer resources and deeper scars. "Not this time," she whispered to the empty room. "This time I stay and fight." The words felt hollow, but speaking them aloud gave her something to hold on to as she eased her aching body onto the bed and surrendered to exhaustion. Isaac Blackwood rode his Palomino, gelding slowly along the morning patrol route, his thoughts circling back to the woman from yesterday's stagecoach. Something in her guarded stance and veiled face had triggered his lawman's instincts. Trouble followed that woman, either pursuing her or left in her wake. He couldn't yet tell. "Morning, Deputy," Walter Jenkins called from the doorway of his mercantile. "Coffee's hot if you're of a mind." Isaac dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Obliged, Walter." "Any news worth hearing?" The storekeeper poured thick black coffee into a tin mug. "Freight wagon's due tomorrow, and Sullivan's got a new boarder, pretty little thing despite someone using her face for practice." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Town's business isn't discussing a lady's misfortunes, Walter." "No offense meant," Walter backpedaled. "Just noting she came in looking worse for wear. Sullivan says she's seeking employment. Thought maybe your sister might need help at the schoolhouse." Isaac considered this. His younger sister Isabel had been complaining about managing 30 children alone since her assistant had married and moved to Denver. "I'll mention it to Belle," he said, draining his coffee. But Walter spread the word that Miss Foster's past is her own business. "Whispering Creek can show more Christian charity than gossip." "Sure thing, Deputy." Walter looked properly chastised. "Though you might want to tell Widow Sherman that. She's already speculating the girl's running from a husband." By midday, Isaac had heard 3 more versions of Wilhelmina Foster's supposed history, each more colorful than the last. Small towns thrived on speculation, and a mysterious, injured young woman was too tempting a subject to ignore. He was headed back to his office when he spotted her emerging from the milliner's shop, paper in hand. She'd exchanged yesterday's travel-worn dress for a simple blue calico, high-necked and modest. Her honey-brown hair was neatly pinned beneath a plain bonnet, and though she still carried herself with caution, there was determination in her step. "Miss Foster," he called, approaching slowly. "Settling in all right," she startled, then relaxed marginally when she recognized him. "Deputy Blackwood, yes, thank you for your assistance yesterday. Found employment yet?" he asked, falling into step beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Not yet." She held up the paper. "I've collected addresses of establishments that might need help." The milliner suggested the hotel might need a chambermaid. Isaac frowned. "The Prairie Rose isn't a place for a lady like yourself. The owner, Sawyer, runs card games in the back room. Miners with money to spend and liquor in their bellies aren't always gentlemanly." For the first time, he saw a flash of fire in her eyes, a glimpse of spirit beneath the caution. "I appreciate your concern, Deputy, but I've worked in less savory establishments than a frontier hotel. I need income more than I need protection." The words weren't spoken with insolence, merely practical determination. Isaac found himself admiring her resilience, even as he worried for her safety. "My sister runs the schoolhouse," he said. "She's in need of an assistant teacher. Pays modest but includes a small room attached to the schoolhouse. More importantly, it's respectable work." Willa hesitated, suspicion warring with hope in her expression. "Why would your sister hire someone she's never met, someone with no references or teaching experience?" "Belle's a good judge of character," Isaac replied, "and she's desperate enough to at least interview you. Come by the schoolhouse at 4. It's past the church, small white building with a bell tower." For a moment he thought she would refuse, then her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you." "I'll be there." As she turned to leave, Isaac called after her, "Miss Foster, whatever or whoever you're running from, Whispering Creek is under my protection. That includes everyone who calls it home, even temporarily." She froze, then looked back at him, the bruise around her eye standing in stark contrast to her pale skin. "Some men's violence reaches farther than you might expect, Deputy, but I appreciate the sentiment." Willa spent the afternoon rehearsing answers to expected questions, constructing a version of her past that concealed more than it revealed. By 4 o'clock, she stood before the small schoolhouse, gathering courage before knocking on the door. "It's open," called a cheerful voice. Inside, a young woman barely 20 years old was erasing a chalkboard. She turned, revealing a feminine version of the deputy's features, the same penetrating eyes, though hers sparkled with warmth rather than caution. "You must be Miss Foster." "I'm Isabel Blackwood, though everyone calls me Belle." She wiped chalk dust on her apron and extended her hand. Isaac mentioned you're seeking employment. Yes, Willa replied, surprised by the younger woman's forthright manner, though I should be honest, I have no formal teaching experience. Belle laughed. Can you read, write, cipher, and prevent children from setting each other's hair on fire? That's all the qualification needed in Whispering Creek. Despite her nervousness, Willa found herself smiling. I can manage that, I think. Excellent. The position pays $15 monthly, plus room and board. The children range from 5 to 15 years, though most of the older boys are only here during winter months when the mines slow down. Belle gestured around the simple classroom. We have 28 students currently. It's not Denver or St. Louis, but it sounds perfect, Willa interrupted, not wanting to discuss either city. Belle's expression softened. Isaac said you might have had some trouble. You don't need to explain. Whispering Creek has become home to many people seeking fresh starts. She smiled. Including our family, Boston society wasn't exactly heartbroken when the Blackwoods headed west after the war. The next hour passed in discussion of duties and schedules. The attached quarters were tiny, just a bedroom and sitting area with a small stove, but they offered privacy and independence Willa hadn't expected to find. When can you start? Belle asked. Tomorrow, Willa suggested, afraid the opportunity might vanish if she hesitated. Perfect. The children will be delighted to have a new face. Some of them have never seen anyone from outside Colorado territory. As Willa gathered her things to leave, Belle added casually, We're having supper at Isaac's cabin tonight. Would you join us? It's a tradition when we hire new staff. All 2 times it's happened. The invitation triggered Willa's caution. I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense. Isaac is an excellent cook, surprisingly. It's just up the hill behind the schoolhouse. 6 o'clock. Unable to formulate a polite refusal, Willa found herself agreeing. An hour later, she walked the path to a small but well-built cabin nestled among pine trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of cooking meat made her stomach growl, reminding her she'd eaten little that day. Isaac opened the door before she knocked, as if he'd been watching for her. Without his badge and gun belt, dressed in a clean shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, he looked less intimidating, handsome, even in a weathered, self-contained way. Miss Foster, welcome. The cabin's interior surprised her. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on law, history, and literature. A guitar rested in the corner. The furnishings were simple but crafted with care, not the rough accommodations she'd expected from a bachelor lawman. Belle's running late, Isaac explained, gesturing toward a chair. Something about a missing primer for tomorrow's lessons. Willa sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap. Without Belle's cheerful chatter, tension crept into the room. You don't trust easily, Isaac observed, turning back to the stove where a stew bubbled. That's prudent in many circumstances. Experience has been an effective teacher, she replied, then wished she'd remained silent. Isaac nodded, stirring the pot. May I speak plainly, Miss Foster? Her pulse quickened. I suppose so. I won't ask who hurt you. That's your business until you choose to make it otherwise. He turned to face her, his expression serious. But if that person follows you to Whispering Creek, it becomes my business. Not because I doubt your word, but because protection of this town and its people is my sworn duty. Willa stared at him, searching for the hidden agenda behind his words. Men in her experience never offered protection without expecting something in return. Are you asking if someone is pursuing me, Deputy? Isaac, he corrected. And no, I'm telling you that if someone is, you needn't face them alone. The simple statement, delivered without dramatic promise or excessive sentiment, penetrated Willa's defenses more effectively than any grand declaration could have. For 3 years since leaving St. Louis, she'd stood alone against the world's cruelties. The possibility of an ally, even a temporary one, was almost too much to process. His name is Richard Coleman, she said finally, the words tasting bitter. He's a businessman in Denver. I was his housekeeper for nearly a year. When I refused his advances, he became violent. She touched her fading bruise. This was the 3rd time. I took money from his desk, money he owed me in wages, and fled. He'll be looking, if only because no one defies Richard Coleman without consequences. Isaac's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. "Did you report him to Denver authorities?" A humorless laugh escaped her. "Richard donates generously to the police benevolent fund. He plays poker with the chief of police. Who would believe a housekeeper over a respected citizen? They would say I lied about the man who hurt me, that I was trying to extort money or was dismissed for theft." "I believe you," Isaac said simply. Without question, before Willa could respond, the door burst open and Belle swept in, breathless and apologizing for her tardiness. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a tentative trust established, a connection formed through 3 simple words. "I believe you." Over the following weeks, Willa settled into Whispering Creek life with cautious optimism. The schoolchildren accepted her immediately, especially the younger ones who found her willingness to explain lessons repeatedly a welcome change from Belle's sometimes impatient instruction. The bruises faded, and with them, some of her wariness. Mrs. Sullivan returned her boarding house deposit without fuss, and Willa made her small quarters at the schoolhouse into a home. She hung curtains sewn from fabric purchased at Jenkins' Mercantile, arranged wild flowers in a jar on her table, and began to sleep through the night without startling at every sound. Isaac kept his distance, but remained attentive from afar. Occasionally, they exchanged greetings when their paths crossed in town. Twice, he brought books from his personal library that he thought might interest her, collections of poetry, and a volume on natural science that he remembered Belle mentioning was part of the curriculum. Willa found herself watching for him, noting the respectful way he treated everyone from the banker to the Chinese laundry owner. He carried himself with quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it, so different from Richard Coleman's blustering entitlement or her father's cold dominance. June melted into July, bringing afternoon thunderstorms and sweltering heat. The schoolhouse became stifling despite open windows, and Belle dismissed classes early on the hottest days. On one such afternoon, Willa walked to Whispering Creek itself, the small river that gave the town its name, seeking relief from the heat. She found a secluded spot downstream from where the miners panned for gold, removed her shoes and stockings, and dangled her feet in the cool water. Lost in thought, she didn't hear approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her. Miss Foster. She jumped, turning to find Isaac standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. "Deputy Isaac, you startled me." "My apologies. I saw you heading this direction and thought I should warn you there's a church picnic planned here Sunday. The ladies are coming tomorrow to clear the area for tables." "Oh," Willa smoothed her skirt, embarrassed to be caught in such an informal state. "Thank you for the warning." Instead of leaving, Isaac hesitated, then asked, "May I join you, unless you prefer solitude?" Something in his hesitant manner touched her. This strong, capable man suddenly seemed uncertain, as if her refusal might genuinely disappoint him. "Please," she said, gesturing to the grassy bank beside her. Isaac sat, leaving appropriate space between them, and removed his boots with methodical movements. When he rolled up his pant legs to place his feet in the water, Willa noticed a long scar running along his calf. "Shiloh," he said, catching her glance. "Confederate cavalry saber. I was 17, too young to enlist properly, but determined to preserve the Union." "You fought in the war?" Willa asked, realizing how little she knew about him beyond his present role. 3 years, missed the beginning but saw more than enough of the end. His expression darkened momentarily. "Came west afterward. Boston held too many ghosts." They sat in companionable silence, the burble of the creek filling the space between them. A kingfisher darted past, its brilliant blue plumage flashing in the sunlight. "Belle mentioned your birthday is approaching," Isaac said eventually. "The ladies of the church are planning a small celebration after services Sunday. I hope that's not unwelcome." Willa's breath caught. Her birthday, July 16th, had passed unremarked for years. "That's very kind, but unnecessary. I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition." "The town has taken to you." He glanced at her, a hint of a smile softening his features. "You've become part of Whispering Creek faster than most newcomers." "I've tried to keep to myself," Willa protested. And yet you've helped Widow Sherman preserve her apple harvest, taught Mary Jenkins to read despite her father's insistence girls need only enough letters to write shopping lists, and convinced Reverend Porter to allow girls to participate in the Independence Day recitations. Isaac's smile widened. For someone trying to remain uninvolved, you've made quite an impression. Willa hadn't considered her actions remarkable. She'd simply responded to needs as they arose, finding unexpected satisfaction in being useful beyond the schoolhouse. People here are kind, she said. It makes helping them easy. Not everyone finds that true. Isaac's tone grew serious. Some see only the rough edges of frontier life, the mud and the hardship and the lack of refinement. They miss the strength and decency beneath. Like you saw beyond my bruises to the person beneath. The words slipped out before she could reconsider them. Isaac met her eyes directly. I saw someone who'd been wronged but not broken, someone with courage enough to start again among strangers. The simple honesty of his assessment brought unexpected tears to Willa's eyes. She looked away, blinking rapidly. I should return to the schoolhouse. Belle will wonder where I've gone. Of course. Isaac retrieved his boots but made no move to put them on immediately. Miss Foster, Wilhelmina, may I escort you to the church picnic Sunday? As friends, he added hastily, seeing her expression. No obligations or expectations. The prospect of appearing publicly beside the deputy would certainly fuel town gossip, yet Willa found herself nodding. I would like that, she admitted, as friends. His smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed his serious features, revealing a dimple in his right cheek she'd never noticed before. Until Sunday, then. As July ripened toward August, Willa found herself drawn increasingly into Whispering Creek's community life. The birthday celebration, a simple affair with cake and a gift of handkerchiefs embroidered by the church ladies, had touched her deeply. For the first time since leaving her family's home in St. Louis, she felt seen and valued. Her relationship with Isaac evolved gradually from cautious acquaintance to genuine friendship. They exchanged books and opinions, debated politics during evening walks, and found unexpected common ground in their love of music. Isaac played guitar while Willa had a clear, sweet singing voice she'd nearly forgotten she possessed. Yet beneath the growing contentment, anxiety lingered. Each stagecoach arrival brought renewed fear that Richard Coleman had discovered her whereabouts. The man's pride and temper wouldn't allow her escape to go unpunished. Of this Willa was certain. Her fears materialized on a sweltering August afternoon as she supervised the children's recess. A dust cloud on the main road heralded the stagecoach's arrival 2 days early and unexpected. Willa's heart seized when a familiar figure emerged from the coach. Not Richard himself, but his personal secretary, Edwin Palmer, a thin, fastidious man whose obsequious manner concealed ruthless efficiency. If Palmer was here, Richard had sent him with purpose. Willa gathered the children and hurried them inside, ignoring their protests about shortened playtime. Reading competition, she announced with forced cheerfulness. Whoever reads their passage with fewest mistakes earns extra time tomorrow. As the children settled reluctantly with their primers, Willa slipped out the back door and hurried toward the marshal's office. Isaac would know what to do. The thought came unbidden, surprising her with how naturally she turned to him in crisis. She found him at his desk, sorting wanted posters. His expression shifted instantly from welcome to concern at the sight of her flushed face. Willa, what's happened? The familiar address recently adopted in private steadied her. Richard Coleman's secretary just arrived on the stagecoach. Edwin Palmer, tall, thin man with spectacles and a black suit. He's here for me, Isaac. Richard would never let me simply disappear. Isaac stood, buckling his gun belt with practiced movements. Stay here, I'll speak with him, see what he wants. No, panic edged her voice. Palmer is slippery, he'll twist words, make insinuations. Richard probably sent him with legal papers, theft accusations, perhaps, or claims I've stolen property. Let him try. Isaac's calm certainty contrasted with her agitation. False accusations require evidence. Besides, you've established yourself here as a respectable, valued citizen. Your word against a stranger's, I know which Whispering Creek will believe. His confidence bolstered her courage. I should confront him directly. Hiding only makes me appear guilty. Isaac considered this, then nodded slowly. Together then, but let me do the talking initially. They found Palmer outside the hotel, instructing the stagecoach driver about his luggage with imperious precision. Up close, Willa could see travel dust coating his normally immaculate attire, a sign of urgent mission, as Palmer despised disorder in any form. Mr. Palmer, Isaac called, positioning himself slightly ahead of Willa. I'm Deputy Marshal Blackwood. Welcome to Whispering Creek. I understand you're looking for someone. Palmer turned, annoyance flickering across his narrow features before recognition dawned as he spotted Willa. A thin smile appeared. Ah, Miss Foster, how convenient. Mr. Coleman was correct about your likely destination. He brushed dust from his sleeve. I've traveled a considerable distance to resolve certain irregularities regarding your departure from Mr. Coleman's household. Any business you have with Miss Foster can be conducted in my office, Isaac stated, his tone brooking no argument. After you've had opportunity to refresh yourself from your journey, of course. Palmer's gaze shifted between them, assessing the situation with calculating precision. I see Miss Foster has secured protection. How resourceful, though misplaced, I assure you, Deputy. I merely bring a business proposition from Mr. Coleman. As I said, Isaac repeated, my office, 4 o'clock. Palmer inclined his head in a gesture that managed to be both acquiescent and condescending. Very well, until then. As he turned toward the hotel entrance, Willa called after him, finding her voice at last. Tell Richard I want nothing from him except to be left in peace. Palmer paused, not turning. Mr. Coleman rarely accepts refusal, Miss Foster, particularly from those who have taken what doesn't belong to them. Isaac stepped forward, his hand dropping casually to rest on his holstered revolver. That sounds remarkably like an accusation, Mr. Palmer. I'd be careful about making those without evidence in my jurisdiction. Merely an observation, Deputy. Palmer disappeared into the hotel without further comment. By 4 o'clock, word of the confrontation had spread throughout Whispering Creek. When Willa and Isaac entered the marshal's office, they found Belle waiting inside, arms crossed and expression mutinous. I heard everything from Walter Jenkins, she declared. That odious little man is claiming Willa stole from her employer. The entire town is talking about it. Belle, Isaac sighed, this isn't helping. It absolutely is helping, his sister countered. I've already spoken with Reverend Porter, Mrs. Sullivan, and the school board. Everyone agrees Willa's character is beyond reproach. Whatever this Palmer person claims, the town stands with her. Willa's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. You didn't need to do that. Of course I did. Your family now. Belle stated this as simple fact, not sentiment. Before Willa could respond, the door opened and Edwin Palmer entered, carrying a leather portfolio. He changed into fresh clothing and looked every inch the prosperous businessman's representative. Quite the welcoming committee, he observed dryly. I had hoped for a private discussion. Miss Blackwood was just leaving, Isaac replied, giving his sister a pointed look. Belle huffed but complied, squeezing Willa's hand before departing. Remember what I said, the whole town. Once they were seated, Palmer opened his portfolio and removed several documents. Mr. Coleman is prepared to be generous despite the circumstances of your departure, Miss Foster. He recognizes that certain misunderstandings occurred and wishes to resolve matters amicably. What exactly does that mean? Isaac asked. Palmer slid a document across the desk. A sum of $100, in exchange for Miss Foster's signature on this agreement acknowledging receipt of all wages due and renouncing any claims against Mr. Coleman's reputation or person. Willa stared at the paper, understanding dawning. He's afraid I'll make accusations public. Mr. Coleman is a prominent businessman with political aspirations. Scandalous allegations, even false ones, could prove damaging. Palmer adjusted his spectacles. $100 is quite generous for a housekeeper's silence. And the theft accusations, Isaac prompted, Mr. Coleman is willing to overlook the missing funds, approximately $40, I believe, as part of this arrangement. Palmer's tone suggested tremendous magnanimity in this concession. A fresh start for all parties. Willa's fingers curled into fists beneath the table. He owes me those $40 in unpaid wages. I took only what was rightfully mine after she stopped, unwilling to speak the details aloud. After he beat her, Isaac finished, his calm voice belying the anger in his eyes. After he struck a woman in his employment, leaving visible bruises because she refused his inappropriate advances. Those are the misunderstandings you're referring to, I presume. Palmer's expression remained impassive. Mr. Coleman categorically denies any improper behavior. Miss Foster's injuries resulted from a fall down the service stairs witnessed by the cook and second housemaid. Employees dependent on Richard for their livelihoods, Willa countered bitterly. Who would say whatever he told them to say? This agreement offers a clean resolution, Palmer continued as if she hadn't spoken. Mr. Coleman has no desire to pursue criminal charges for theft or defamation. He merely wishes to conclude this unfortunate episode and move forward. Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying Palmer with the steady gaze that had intimidated many more dangerous men. Let me understand correctly. You've traveled over 300 miles to offer hush money to a woman your employer assaulted, while simultaneously threatening her with false criminal accusations if she refuses. Is that an accurate summary, Mr. Palmer? Color rose in Palmer's sallow cheeks. You misconstrue. I don't believe I do. Isaac stood, towering over the seated secretary. Here's my counter-offer. You leave Whispering Creek on tomorrow morning's stagecoach. You tell Coleman that Miss Foster has established herself as a respected member of this community under the protection of the law. Any further harassment, legal or otherwise, will result in her full account of his behavior being sent to every newspaper in Denver and the territorial governor's office. Palmer's mouth thinned to a bloodless line. Mr. Coleman will not be threatened, Deputy. Neither will Miss Foster. Isaac's voice hardened. She's not alone anymore. For a long moment, tension filled the small office. Then Palmer carefully returned the documents to his portfolio. I shall convey your position to Mr. Coleman, however I cannot predict his response. He rose stiffly. Good day, Deputy, Miss Foster. After he left, Willa released a shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He'll tell Richard everything. This isn't over. Isaac sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the reassuring solidity of his presence without touching. Coleman would be a fool to pursue this. The farther scandal spreads, the more damage to his reputation. You don't know Richard, Willa whispered. He doesn't think like rational men. His pride won't allow him to be defied, especially by a woman he considered his property. Then he'll learn a harsh lesson about territorial justice. Isaac hesitated, then covered her trembling hand with his own. I meant what I said, Willa. You're not alone in this fight. The warmth of his rough palm against her skin sent awareness shimmering through her. In that moment, Willa recognized the danger wasn't only from Richard Coleman, but from her own growing feelings for the steady lawman beside her. Trusting another man seemed impossible after all she'd endured, yet Isaac had proven himself different in every way that mattered. Thank you, she managed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. I should return to the schoolhouse. The children will be wondering where I've gone. Isaac walked her back, maintaining a proper distance that nevertheless felt protective rather than constraining. The late afternoon sun cast their shadows long across the dusty streets, separate but somehow aligned, moving in tandem toward an uncertain future. Edwin Palmer departed on the morning stagecoach as instructed, his rigid posture and tight expression suggesting his mission had failed entirely. Willa watched the coach disappear into the distance, wondering if the confrontation had truly ended or merely entered a temporary lull. September brought cooler temperatures and increasing student attendance as harvest season wound down. Willa threw herself into teaching, finding purpose in the children's progress and joy in their uncomplicated acceptance. Her friendship with Isaac continued to deepen through shared meals with Belle, church socials, and quiet conversations that revealed their compatible minds and values. By early October, Willa had almost convinced herself the danger had passed. Richard Coleman, for all his vindictiveness, was ultimately a practical businessman. Surely he would recognize that pursuing a former housekeeper across such distance served no purpose but to risk his own reputation. Then the letter arrived. It came addressed to the schoolhouse, the handwriting unfamiliar but refined. Willa opened it during her midday break while the children played outside under Belle's supervision. "Miss Foster, I write as a former colleague from Mr. Coleman's household. Since your departure, conditions have deteriorated considerably. Mr. Coleman's temper has become unpredictable, particularly after Mr. Palmer's return from your location. I feel obligated to warn you that Mr. Coleman departed Denver 3 days ago, ostensibly for business in Cheyenne. However, I overheard him instructing the stable master to prepare for a longer journey. He was accompanied by 2 men unknown to the household staff, rough-looking individuals not consistent with his usual business associates. I fear his intentions toward you are malevolent. Please exercise extreme caution." A friend. The letter trembled in Willa's hands. No signature, no identifying information, yet the details rang true. Richard would never accept defeat, especially at the hands of a woman he considered beneath him. She needed to warn Isaac immediately. Gathering her shawl, she stepped outside to find Belle, intending to ask her to watch the classroom while she visited the marshal's office. Instead, she froze at the sight of 3 riders approaching the schoolhouse, Richard Coleman's distinctive figure in the center, flanked by 2 bearded men whose well-worn clothing and armed appearance marked them as hired guns rather than business associates. Belle noticed her expression and followed her gaze. "Willa, who are those men? Get the children inside," Willa ordered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Bar the door behind you. Don't open it for anyone except Isaac or me." Understanding immediately, Belle began gathering the protesting children. Inside, quickly, we're having an unexpected reading competition. As the last child disappeared into the schoolhouse, Willa heard the reassuring thud of the heavy wooden bar falling into place across the door. At least the children and Belle would be safe. She turned to face the approaching riders, lifting her chin and squaring her shoulders. Running would accomplish nothing. There was nowhere to hide in the open schoolyard, and she refused to lead danger toward town where innocent bystanders might be hurt. Richard Coleman reined his horse to a stop 20 feet away. At 45, he cut an imposing figure, broad-shouldered and expensively dressed, with silver threading his dark hair and beard. His handsome features were arranged in an expression of pained reasonableness that Willa recognized as his most dangerous mood. "Wilhelmina," he called, his deep voice carrying easily across the yard. "How delightful to find you so promptly. You've led me on quite a chase, my dear." "I'm not your dear," Willa replied, grateful her voice didn't tremble. "You have no business here, Mr. Coleman. Please leave." Richard dismounted with fluid grace that belied his size, handing his reins to one of his companions. "Such hostility, after I've traveled all this way to resolve our misunderstanding. Surely we can discuss matters civilly." "We have nothing to discuss." Deputy Marshal Blackwood made our position clear to Mr. Palmer. "Ah yes, your protective lawman." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Unfortunately, I was never one to accept ultimatums from minor officials in backwater settlements, particularly when they interfere with my personal affairs." He took a step toward her and Willa instinctively backed away. "This is a public schoolhouse. The children are inside. Whatever you're planning, there are witnesses." "I'm planning nothing untoward," Richard replied, sounding wounded. "Merely to escort you back to Denver where you belong. Your position remains open. The replacement girl is entirely incompetent." The casual way he dismissed the violence that had driven her to flee infuriated Willa. "I will never return to your household. I've established a life here, respectable employment, friends who know my true character." "Your true character?" Richard's facade of civility slipped momentarily, revealing the rage beneath. "A common thief who spread vicious lies about her employer, who seduced a local lawman to gain protection." He gestured dismissively around the schoolyard. This pathetic existence can't possibly satisfy you, Wilhelmina. You were meant for better things. Better things than being beaten for refusing a man's advances. Willa's fear transformed into righteous anger. Better than being treated as property rather than a person. I disagree, Mr. Coleman. I've found exactly what I deserve here: respect, independence, and safety. Richard's expression darkened. Safety is an illusion, my dear, as you're about to discover. He signaled to his companions, who dismounted and began moving to flank Willa from different directions. Their intentions were chillingly clear. They meant to take her by force if necessary. Think carefully about your next action, came a steady voice from behind her. All of you. Willa had never been so relieved to hear Isaac's voice. He approached on horseback, rifle held casually but unmistakably ready, his deputy's badge catching the autumn sunlight. This doesn't concern you, Marshal, Richard said coldly. This woman was in my employment and departed under questionable circumstances, taking property that wasn't hers. I'm simply recovering what belongs to me. Miss Foster belongs to no one but herself, Isaac replied, dismounting to stand beside Willa. And as I explained to your representative, any grievances you believe you have should be pursued through proper legal channels, not by arriving with armed men at a schoolhouse full of children. The standoff stretched taut between them, Coleman and his men on one side, Isaac and Willa on the other. Inside the schoolhouse, small faces pressed against windows, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. I have considerable influence with territorial officials, Richard warned. Your interference could prove costly to your career, Deputy. Isaac's expression remained impassive. Fortunately, I answer to the people of Whispering Creek, not territorial politicians. And threatening a peace officer is a serious offense, Mr. Coleman. I suggest you and your friends depart immediately. Or what? Sneered one of Richard's companions, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. One lawman against 3 of us, those ain't favorable odds. Count again, came Walter Jenkins' voice as he approached from the direction of town, shotgun in hand. Behind him came Reverend Porter, the blacksmith, and several miners, all armed and grimly determined. Bell must have sent one of the older children out the back window to fetch help, Willer realized. The townspeople had responded without hesitation. Richard Coleman surveyed the gathering crowd, reassessing his position with the calculating precision that had made him successful in business. The odds had shifted dramatically against him. This is hardly necessary, he said, his tone shifting to injured dignity. I merely wish to speak with my former employee. If she's determined to remain in this charming community, I won't force the issue. Then you and your men can ride out the way you came, Isaac replied evenly. After surrendering your weapons as a show of good faith, you can collect them at the marshal's office when you depart town. For a moment, Willa thought Richard would refuse. Violence simmered beneath his controlled exterior, the familiar rage she'd seen before his hand struck her face. Then, with visible effort, he mastered himself. As you wish, Deputy, though this display of force seems excessive for a simple conversation. He nodded to his men, who reluctantly handed their revolvers to Isaac. Richard unbuckled his own gun belt and passed it over with exaggerated courtesy. Wilhelmina, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone as the townspeople began to disperse. This isn't finished. One way or another, you'll regret your defiance. Before she could respond, Isaac stepped between them. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Coleman. I'd reconsider your words carefully. Richard's smile was cold. Merely an observation, Deputy. Good day. As the 3 men mounted and rode toward town, Willa's legs nearly buckled with delayed reaction. Isaac steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. Are you all right? Yes, she managed, though her voice betrayed her. The children, Belle's taking care of them, Isaac assured her. Walter, would you tell my sister to keep the children inside until I return? I need to escort Miss Foster to town and ensure our visitors actually leave. Of course, Deputy. Walter clapped Isaac's shoulder. We'll keep watch here. Nobody gets near the schoolhouse. As they walked toward Isaac's waiting horse, Willa finally gave voice to her deepest fear. He won't stop, Isaac, not until he's punished me for defying him. That's who Richard Coleman is. Isaac helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The intimacy of their position her back against his chest, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins, would normally have concerned her. Now it felt like sanctuary. Then we'll be ready, he said simply, his breath warm against her hair. Not just me, you saw the town's response. Whispering Creek protects its own. As they rode toward town, Willa leaned slightly into his solid strength, allowing herself to accept the protection offered so freely. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. Richard Coleman and his men departed Whispering Creek the following morning, collecting their weapons under Isaac's watchful eye before mounting their horses and riding east toward Denver. Their departure should have brought relief, but Willa couldn't shake the conviction that Richard's obsessive pride wouldn't allow the matter to end so easily. October slipped into November, bringing the first dusting of snow to the mountain passes. The schoolhouse stove burned constantly now, and the children arrived bundled in scarves and mittens knitted by mothers and grandmothers preparing for the harsh Colorado winter ahead. Willa found unexpected joy in the approaching holiday season. Whispering Creek embraced Thanksgiving and Christmas with enthusiasm that transformed the rugged mining town. Even the saloon displayed pine boughs and red ribbons in its grimy windows. Through it all, her relationship with Isaac deepened beyond friendship into something neither of them had named, but both acknowledged through small gestures, his hand lingering when helping her from a wagon. Her special care in preparing his favorite apple cake for Sunday suppers, the way their eyes sought each other across the crowded church. Belle observed their growing attachment with barely concealed delight, creating transparent excuses to leave them alone together. "I've just remembered urgent business with Mrs. Sullivan," she would announce midway through evening meals, departing before either could protest. On a clear December evening 2 weeks before Christmas, Isaac invited Willa to accompany him on a short ride. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant, "if you're willing to brave the cold." They rode double on his horse, following a narrow trail into the foothills above town. Fresh snow crunched beneath the animals' hooves, and their breath clouded in the crisp air. After 20 minutes, they emerged into a small clearing overlooking Whispering Creek. The town's lights twinkled below like fallen stars, while real stars blazed overhead in the velvet darkness. "It's beautiful," Willa breathed, accepting Isaac's hand as he helped her dismount. "I discovered this place my first week here," he said, spreading a blanket over a fallen log so they could sit. "Whenever the job weighs too heavily, I come up here to remember what I'm protecting." Willa studied his profile in the moonlight, the strong lines of his jaw, the steadiness in his gaze as he looked toward the town below. In the month since her arrival, she'd learned that his quiet exterior concealed deep conviction and unexpected tenderness. "Isaac," she began hesitantly, "I've never properly thanked you, not just for standing against Richard, but for believing me from the beginning. You have no idea what that meant, what it still means." He turned to her, his expression serious. "You never needed to thank me for recognizing the truth, Willa. Any decent man would have done the same." "That's where you're wrong," she said softly. "Decent men looked away in St. Louis when my father's temper turned violent. Decent men in Denver believed Richard Coleman's reputation over a housekeeper's bruises. You were the first to simply believe me without question." Isaac's hand found hers, his calloused palm warm despite the winter chill. "Perhaps I recognized something in you that reminded me of myself after the war, someone fighting to rebuild after everything familiar had been lost." "Is that why you came west, to rebuild?" He nodded slowly. "After Appomattox, I returned to Boston a different man than the boy who'd enlisted. The nightmares, the memories, they followed me everywhere. My family meant well, but they couldn't understand what I'd seen, what I'd done." His voice dropped lower. "One night I woke screaming, convinced I was back at Cold Harbor. My father tried to restrain me, and I nearly broke his arm before I recognized him." Willa squeezed his hand, offering silent understanding. "The next day I bought a westbound train ticket, Isaac continued. Ended up in Denver, then worked as a shotgun messenger for Wells Fargo before Marshal Hollister offered me the deputy position here. Found peace in the mountains that eluded me back east. And now, are the nightmares gone? His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist. Not entirely. But less frequent. The past never disappears completely, Willa. We just learn to carry it differently. The truth of his words resonated through her. Her own past her father's coldness, Richard's violence would always be part of her. But perhaps, like Isaac, she could learn to carry those memories without being defined by them. I've been considering something, Isaac said after a moment. I've written to the territorial marshal about Richard Coleman. There's an investigation into corruption among Denver officials. Coleman's name has appeared repeatedly in connection with bribes and preferential treatment. Your testimony about his character and behaviors could prove valuable. Willa stiffened. You want me to publicly accuse him? Only if you choose to, Isaac assured her. Your safety and peace of mind come first, but it might help protect other women from suffering what you endured and provide additional security for you. Coleman would think twice about retaliation against a key witness in a territorial investigation. The possibility of speaking her truth to authorities who might actually listen of her words carrying weight against Richard's influence was both terrifying and exhilarating. I need time to consider, she said finally. Of course. Isaac stood, helping her to her feet. There's no rush for decision. As they faced each other in the moonlight, something shifted between them, the careful distance they'd maintained dissolving in the crystalline winter air. Willa found herself studying the strong lines of his face, wondering how it would feel beneath her fingertips. Willa, Isaac said, his voice rougher than usual, I've tried to maintain proper distance to give you time and space to heal. But my feelings for you have grown beyond what I can rightly conceal. If that's unwelcome, tell me now, and I'll never speak of it again. Her heart thundered against her ribs. The prospect of trusting a man with her heart after all she'd endured should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a curious certainty, as if she'd been walking a winding path that inevitably led to this moment, this man. Not unwelcome, she whispered. Unexpected, perhaps, but not unwelcome. Isaac moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw. His hands cradled her face with infinite gentleness, thumbs brushing her cheekbones as if she were made of finest porcelain. When his lips finally met hers, the kiss was tender, questioning, asking permission rather than demanding response. Willa answered by curling her fingers into the rough wool of his coat, drawing him closer as something long dormant awakened within her. This was nothing like Richard's brutal attempts or the awkward fumbling of suitors in St. Louis. Isaac kissed her as if she were precious, irreplaceable, as if he'd waited his entire life for this moment. When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Wilhelmina Foster, not because you need protection or because you've endured hardship, but because you're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known. The words so simply stated, yet carrying such profound meaning, brought tears to her eyes. I love you too, she replied, the admission both frightening and freeing, though I never expected to say those words to anyone again. We'll take each day as it comes, Isaac promised. No rushing, no pressure, whatever pace feels right for you. They returned to town hand in hand, a new understanding between them. Belle took one look at their expressions when they arrived at the Blackwood cabin for supper and let out a delighted whoop that brought embarrassed color to her brother's cheeks. It's about time, she exclaimed, embracing Willa fiercely. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you both in the schoolhouse supply closet. Belle, Isaac admonished, though his smile belied any real irritation. The next week passed in a blur of happiness, as Willa and Isaac navigated their new relationship under the approving eyes of the community. Whispering Creek had long ago decided they belonged together, and the confirmation merely validated what townspeople considered obvious. Reverend Porter cornered Isaac after Sunday services to discuss intentions, while Mrs. Sullivan revised her boarding house rules to allow Willa to receive Isaac as a caller in the parlor past the usual restriction hour. Even crusty old Walter Jenkins contributed by ordering an illustrated volume of Tennyson's poems from Denver as a joint Christmas gift for the couple. 5 days before Christmas, the stagecoach arrived bearing holiday mail and packages. Willa, finishing afternoon lessons, thought nothing of it until Belle burst into the schoolhouse, face flushed with excitement. "Willa, there's a special delivery for you at the post office. Mr. Peterson says it's from the territorial governor's office." Puzzled, Willa dismissed the children early and accompanied Belle to the small post office. The postmaster handed over an official-looking envelope with the territorial seal. "Seems mighty important," he commented, curiosity evident in his expression. "Not often we get gubernatorial correspondence in Whispering Creek." Willa opened the envelope with trembling fingers, Belle peering unabashedly over her shoulder. Inside was a formal letter requesting her testimony in Denver regarding corruption charges against several prominent businessmen, including Richard Coleman. The investigation had uncovered evidence of bribery, extortion, and misuse of political influence. "Your experiences as an employee in Mr. Coleman's household could provide valuable context to the investigating committee," the letter stated. "Marshal Wilson speaks highly of Deputy Blackwood's assessment of your character and reliability as a witness." "This is Isaac's doing," Willa murmured, equal parts grateful and apprehensive. "Will you go?" Belle asked. "I don't know." The prospect of returning to Denver, of facing Richard again even in a courtroom, sent cold fear through her veins. Yet the opportunity to help bring him to justice, to prevent him from harming others, pulled at her conscience. She found Isaac at his office, showing him the letter with mixed emotions. "You arranged this." "I provided your name as a potential witness," he acknowledged, "but the decision to request your testimony came from the investigation committee. Coleman's activities have finally caught up with him. Your experience is just one piece of a larger pattern they're uncovering." Willa paced the small office, conflicted. "I want him held accountable, I do, but the thought of seeing him again, of having my character questioned by his lawyers." "You wouldn't go alone," Isaac said quietly. "I'd accompany you, and having the territorial government's protection changes the dynamics considerably." She stopped pacing, a realization dawning. "You'd leave Whispering Creek. Who would serve as deputy?" "Walter Jenkins was a Texas Ranger before opening the Mercantile. He's agreed to temporarily fill the position if needed." Isaac approached her, taking her hands in his. "Willa, I would never pressure you to do this. If you choose to decline, I'll support that decision completely. But if you want to testify, to help ensure Coleman faces consequences, I'll be beside you every step." His unwavering support, the absolute certainty that whatever she decided, Isaac would stand with her, settled something within Willa's soul. All her life, men had made decisions for her, from her controlling father to Richard Coleman. Isaac offered partnership instead of dominance, respect instead of subjugation. "I need to think," she said finally. "Can I let you know tomorrow? Take all the time you need." He kissed her forehead gently. "This is your choice, no one else's." That night, as snow fell silently outside her window, Willa made her decision. She would testify not from vendetta or even self-protection, but because silence would make her complicit in whatever harm Richard inflicted on future victims. If her voice could help prevent another woman from suffering as she had, courage demanded she speak. The next morning, she found Isaac clearing snow from the schoolhouse steps before classes began. "I'll go to Denver," she told him without preamble. "I'll testify." Pride illuminated his features. "I'll wire Marshal Wilson today to arrange escort and accommodations." The hearing isn't until mid-January, after the worst winter weather. Relief flooded through her. She had weeks yet to prepare herself. "Thank you for understanding why this matters." "I understand because I know you," Isaac replied simply. "Your strength isn't just in surviving, Willa, it's in refusing to let injustice stand when you have power to address it." His faith in her, so absolute and unquestioning, bolstered her resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Christmas arrived with festive celebration throughout Whispering Creek. The schoolhouse hosted a pageant where children recited poems, and performed tableau of the Nativity to proud parents' applause. Afterward, the entire town gathered for a community supper in the church hall, tables groaning beneath contributions from every household. As midnight approached, Isaac walked Willa back to her quarters, fresh snow crunching beneath their boots. Moonlight transformed the familiar landscape into something magical, tree branches glittering with ice crystals, shadows blue against pristine white drifts. "I have something for you," Isaac said when they reached her door. From his coat pocket, he withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. "But we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow at dinner," Willa protested, though she accepted the package with evident curiosity. "This one couldn't wait," he explained, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. "Open it." Carefully untying the string, Willa unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a ring, a delicate gold band set with a modest pearl surrounded by tiny garnets. "Isaac," she breathed, understanding immediately. He took her hand, his expression solemn yet tender. "I'd planned a more eloquent speech, but words seem inadequate. I love you, Wilhelmina Foster. I want to build a life with you, not as protector and protected, but as equal partners facing whatever comes together." He paused, suddenly vulnerable. "Will you marry me?" Joy welled within her, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd arrived in Whispering Creek broken and afraid, certain her capacity for trust had been permanently destroyed. Now she stood on the threshold of a future brighter than any she'd dared imagine. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." His smile illuminated the winter night as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Belle helped me resize it. I hope you don't mind that she knows keeping secrets from my sister proves nearly impossible." Willa laughed, examining the ring in the moonlight. "I'm surprised the entire town doesn't already know, given Belle's enthusiasm." "They will by noon tomorrow," Isaac predicted, drawing her into his arms. "Reverend Porter has already offered the church for February after we return from Denver, unless you'd prefer to wait longer." The question held genuine consideration. He would postpone indefinitely if she requested it. But Willa found she didn't want to wait. Richard Coleman had stolen enough of her life already. She refused to let fear of him delay her happiness a moment longer. "February sounds perfect," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "A new beginning after we close the door on the past." His kiss held promise of all the tomorrows stretching before them, a future neither of them could have envisioned when she stepped off the stagecoach that June day, battered and afraid. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them as they stood now together, unbroken, believing in each other when doubt threatened. Snow continued falling around them as midnight bells rang out from the church tower, welcoming Christmas Day and all the hope it symbolized. January brought biting cold, and the journey to Denver that Willa had alternately dreaded and anticipated. The territorial marshal himself traveled to Whispering Creek to escort them, bringing news that the corruption investigation had expanded to include multiple officials. "Coleman's fighting back hard," Marshal Wilson informed them as their stagecoach departed. "He's hired lawyers from as far as Chicago to defend him, claims it's a political witch hunt orchestrated by his enemies. Is there risk the charges will be dismissed?" Isaac asked, his hand covering Willa's protectively. "Not anymore," Wilson replied grimly. "We've got documents proving payoffs to judges, building inspectors, even the previous police chief. Coleman's financial records show consistent withdrawals that match deposit dates in officials' accounts. Your testimony, Miss Foster, will establish character context that supports the financial evidence." The journey to Denver took 3 days through snow-laden mountain passes. Despite warm bricks wrapped in flannel at their feet and buffalo robes across their laps, the cold seeped into the stagecoach, leaving everyone stiff and uncomfortable. Willa watched the landscape change from Whispering Creek's rugged wilderness to Denver's expanding urban sprawl with mixed emotions. The city held only painful memories, yet returning as a respected witness rather than a fleeing victim represented how far she'd come. They were lodged in a modest hotel near the territorial offices, their rooms adjoining for propriety while ensuring Isaac remained close enough to offer protection if needed. Marshal Wilson stationed a deputy in the hotel lobby as additional security. "Coleman still has friends in this city," he explained. "Better safe than sorry." The night before her scheduled testimony, Willa stood at her hotel window, watching gaslit street lamps illuminate falling snow. Behind her, Isaac sat reviewing documents at a small writing desk. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked suddenly, giving voice to her deepest fear. "What if Richard's lawyers make me seem unstable or vindictive?" Isaac set down his papers and crossed to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Your truth will stand on its own merit, Willa. The investigation committee has already gathered substantial evidence against Coleman. Your testimony completes the picture, showing the private character behind the public facade." She leaned back against his solid strength. "I keep remembering his face that day at the schoolhouse, so certain of his power, so contemptuous of anyone who challenged it. What happens if he maintains that power despite everything? Justice isn't perfect," Isaac acknowledged, "but Coleman's influence is already diminishing. 3 business partners have distanced themselves from his ventures. The new police chief has publicly committed to investigating all allegations without favoritism." He turned her gently to face him. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won by refusing to let fear silence you." His unwavering faith steadied her, as it had so many times since that first day in Whispering Creek. "How do you always know exactly what I need to hear?" "Practice," he replied with a small smile, "and loving you enough to pay attention." The simplicity of his answer, the depth of understanding it revealed, brought tears to her eyes. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong lines of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing me when no one else would. For seeing me, truly seeing me when others looked away." His kiss was gentle, conveying tenderness rather than passion, exactly what she needed in that moment of vulnerability. "Get some rest," he murmured against her hair. "Tomorrow will be challenging, but you won't face it alone." The territorial courthouse bustled with activity when they arrived the next morning. Journalists from Denver newspapers gathered on the steps, and curious onlookers crowded the entrance, drawn by rumors that prominent businessmen would face public scrutiny. Marshal Wilson escorted them through a side entrance, avoiding the crowd. "The committee understands your concerns about privacy, Miss Foster. You'll testify in the small chamber, not the main courtroom. Only committee members, legal representatives, and essential witnesses will be present." The small chamber still seemed imposingly formal to Willa. Heavy wooden furniture, territorial flag hanging behind the committee chairman's seat, law books lining shelves along one wall. 7 committee members sat at a long table, their expressions varying from sympathetic to skeptically neutral. Richard Coleman sat at a side table with 3 lawyers, his posture rigidly controlled. When Willa entered, his gaze locked on her with cold fury that sent involuntary shivers down her spine. Isaac's hand at her elbow steadied her, a silent reminder of his presence. "Miss Foster," the chairman began after preliminaries were complete, "please understand you're not on trial here. The committee seeks to understand the character and behaviors of Mr. Coleman as context for the financial irregularities under investigation. Please speak truthfully and directly." For the next 2 hours, Willa answered questions about her employment in Coleman's household, his temperament, his treatment of staff, specific incidents of violence she had witnessed or experienced personally. With each response, her voice grew stronger, more certain. Isaac remained in the gallery behind her, his presence a tangible support she could feel without turning. Coleman's lawyers objected frequently, attempting to portray her as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. One particularly aggressive attorney implied a romantic relationship had soured, prompting her fabrications. "Is it not true, Miss Foster, that you developed inappropriate feelings for your employer that he refused to reciprocate?" the lawyer demanded. "Objection," called the territorial prosecutor. "Counsel is attempting to impugn the witness without foundation." "Sustained," ruled the chairman. "Mr. Hargrove, confine your questions to relevant matters." When Richard himself was finally permitted to respond, his performance was masterful wounded dignity overlaying carefully controlled anger. Miss Foster was an adequate housekeeper whose work deteriorated after an unfortunate accident on the service stairs. When I suggested she might be better suited to less demanding employment, she reacted with unexpected hostility. He described her departure as theft followed by defamatory accusations designed to prevent him seeking legal recourse. "I pursued her to Whispering Creek not for vengeance, as she dramatically suggests, but to recover misappropriated funds and offer Christian forgiveness despite her actions." The performance might have been convincing had the committee not already seen financial records. Affidavits from other household staff who'd witnessed his temper and medical testimony about Willa's injuries being inconsistent with a fall. When the day's proceedings concluded, the chairman thanked Willa for her testimony. "The committee finds your account credible and consistent with other evidence presented. You are excused from further appearances unless specifically recalled." Outside in the courthouse corridor, Isaac gathered her into a protective embrace, heedless of propriety. "You were magnificent," he murmured. "Absolutely magnificent." Relief made her light-headed. "Is it really over?" "This part is," Marshal Wilson confirmed, approaching with satisfaction evident in his expression. "The committee has enough to recommend criminal charges against Coleman and 3 city officials. The territorial governors already signed authorization for arrests once the committee submits formal findings." As they prepared to leave through the side entrance, a court clerk hurried toward them. "Deputy Blackwood, telegram for you from Whispering Creek, marked urgent." Isaac read the yellow paper with increasing concern. "It's from Walter. There was a fire at the schoolhouse last night. Belle's fine she was at Sullivan's when it happened, but the building is badly damaged." "Arson?" Marshal Wilson asked sharply. "Walter suspects so." "Started in the attached living quarters where Willa would normally have been sleeping." Isaac's expression hardened. "Coleman has associates unaccounted for men like those who accompanied him to Whispering Creek in October." A warning, Willa realized, cold dread washing through her. "Or retaliation for my testimony." "Marshal, we need to return immediately," Isaac said. "Whispering Creek may be in danger." Wilson nodded grimly. "I'll arrange armed escort on tomorrow morning's stage." "And Coleman won't leave Denver. I'll have deputies watching him around the clock until arrests are made." That night, in the safety of her hotel room, Willa paced anxiously. "I should never have testified. Now the entire town may suffer because of my choices." Isaac caught her hands, halting her movements. "This is exactly what men like Coleman count on. That fear will silence those who could expose them. The schoolhouse can be rebuilt. What matters is that no one was hurt." "This time," Willa replied, her voice breaking. "What about next time?" "Richard won't stop, Isaac, not until he's destroyed everything I care about. Then we ensure there is no next time." Isaac's tone held the quiet determination that had first drawn her to him. "Coleman's freedom and influence are ending." The committee chairman confided the arrests will happen tomorrow, too late for Coleman to send additional threats to Whispering Creek. He drew her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "One more day, Willa, one more day, and this chapter closes for good." Dawn brought heavy snow that delayed their departure until nearly noon. As they prepared to leave for the stagecoach office, Marshal Wilson arrived at their hotel, his expression grave. "There's been a development," he said without preamble. "Coleman's gone." "What?" Isaac demanded. "How is that possible? You had deputies watching him." "He never returned to his residence after yesterday's hearing. We've just discovered he arranged private transportation west. A 2-horse carriage left the city last night." Wilson's mouth set in a grim line. "He's had at least 12 hours head start." "Whispering Creek," Willa whispered, fear constricting her throat. "He's headed for Whispering Creek." Isaac was already gathering their belongings. "We need to leave immediately." Coleman knows the stagecoach schedule. He'll expect us to follow the regular route. I've commandeered a special postal wagon, Wilson replied. Faster than the stage, with fresh horses at each station, you can depart within the hour. The journey that followed was grueling, bone-jarring travel over snow-packed roads, stopping only to change horses and warm themselves briefly at relay stations. They traveled through the night, taking turns sleeping fitfully against each other's shoulders as the wagon creaked and swayed through mountain passes. "How much farther?" Willa asked as dawn broke on their second day of travel, her body aching from the relentless motion. 6 hours if the roads remain passable, the driver called back. There's fresh snow ahead, but nothing the horses can't handle. Isaac studied the gray sky with concern. We need to reach Whispering Creek before dark. If Coleman arrived yesterday, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both understood what Richard Coleman might do with unchecked access to the vulnerable town, especially if driven by rage and desperation. Mid-afternoon brought their first glimpse of familiar territory, the winding approach to Whispering Creek's valley. As they crested the final ridge, Willa gasped in horror. Smoke rose from multiple buildings in the town center. Even from this distance, they could see figures moving frantically through the streets, carrying buckets in a desperate attempt to control what appeared to be several separate fires. "Get us down there," Isaac shouted to the driver, who cracked his whip above the tired horses. They thundered into town amid chaos. The hotel and mercantile were ablaze, flames licking hungrily at wooden structures as townspeople formed bucket brigades from the creek. Marshal Wilson's deputy jumped down before the wagon fully stopped, running to assist the firefighting effort. "Belle," Isaac called, scanning the crowd frantically. "Has anyone seen my sister, Schoolhouse?" Someone shouted back. "She went to salvage what she could." Isaac and Willa exchanged horrified glances. If Coleman had indeed targeted the town out of vengeance, the already damaged schoolhouse would be a likely focus of his rage. "Stay here where it's safe," Isaac urged, reaching for his revolver. "No," Willa caught his arm. "Together, remember. Whatever comes, we face it together." Something shifted in his expression, respect overshadowing concern. With a quick nod, he helped her from the wagon, and they ran toward the edge of town where the schoolhouse stood. The building's charred remains from the previous fire still stood, blackened timbers stark against the snow. As they approached, they saw Belle emerging from the undamaged portion, arms filled with books and primers. "Belle," Isaac called, "get away from there." His sister turned, surprise then relief washing across her face. "Isaac, Willa, thank God you're back. It's terrible fires started simultaneously across town. Walter thinks it's Coleman's men. They rode in before dawn, at least 4 of them. Where are they now?" Isaac demanded, reaching his sister and pulling her away from the vulnerable building. Walter cornered 2 at the livery stable. The Reverend and some miners are holding them at gunpoint. Belle set down her armload of books. But Coleman himself was heading this way about 20 minutes ago. "I thought I saw movement in the trees behind." A sharp crack interrupted her, the unmistakable sound of a revolver being cocked. "What a touching reunion," came Richard Coleman's voice from the tree line. He emerged slowly, gun trained on the group, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled from hard travel. The heroic lawman, his devoted sister, and the lying, thieving woman who destroyed my reputation. Isaac pushed Belle behind him, angling to shield both women. "It's over, Coleman. Marshal Wilson knows you've fled. Territorial warrants have been issued. Every lawman from here to the Utah border will be looking for you." A cold smile twisted Richard's features. "Perhaps, but they'll find you 3 dead long before they find me." A regrettable tragedy: deputy and schoolteachers killed by desperate outlaws while the town burned. He gestured with his free hand toward the smoke rising from buildings behind them. "My associates created excellent distraction, wouldn't you agree?" "You won't escape," Willa said, finding her voice despite her fear. "Even if you kill us, Whispering Creek knows what you've done. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." Richard's gaze fixed on her with the obsessive intensity she remembered all too well. Always defiant Wilhelmina. Always believing yourself cleverer than you are. That's what drew me to you initially, that spirit. His expression hardened. And breaking it would have been most satisfying had you not fled. You're insane, Belle breathed, horror evident in her voice. Visionary, Richard corrected. A man who recognizes that certain people exist to serve my purposes whether they recognize their proper place or not. He gestured with the gun toward the schoolhouse remains. Inside, all of you, a tragic accident coal oil lamp perhaps, flames consuming evidence of what really happened. Isaac shifted subtly, positioning himself. Coleman, listen to reason. Murder will only compound the charges against you. Surrender now and silence. Richard's control slipped, revealing the rage beneath. You took everything from me, deputy, my reputation, my political prospects, my freedom. The least I can take in return is your life and that of the woman you so unwisely championed. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. As Richard's attention fixed on Isaac, Willa glimpsed movement behind him, Walter Jenkins approaching silently through the trees, shotgun raised. Simultaneously, Belle stumbled deliberately, creating distraction as Isaac lunged toward Coleman, the revolver discharged with deafening crack. Isaac grunted in pain but continued his forward momentum, tackling Coleman to the ground as Walter emerged from the tree line, shotgun leveled. "Drop it, Coleman," Walter shouted, "or I drop you." Richard struggled beneath Isaac's weight, still clutching his revolver. "Get off me, you backwater nobody." "Isaac," Willa cried, seeing blood spreading across his left shoulder. "You're hit." Despite his injury, Isaac maintained his grip on Coleman's gun hand, forcing it away from everyone. "Walter, a little help." The storekeeper approached cautiously, using his shotgun butt to strike Coleman's wrist with calculated force. The revolver fell from suddenly nerveless fingers as Richard howled in pain and fury. Within minutes, Richard Coleman, businessman, would be politician, and violent abuser lay trussed with rope, his hands secured behind his back, his imperious manner reduced to impotent threats and curses. "Belle, ride for the doctor," Walter instructed, maintaining his shotgun's aim at their prisoner. "Tell him Isaac's been shot, and send men to help us transport this piece of filth to the jail." As Belle ran toward town, Willa knelt beside Isaac, who had collapsed to a sitting position against a tree trunk, his face pale but determined. "How bad?" she asked, carefully examining his shoulder. "Through and through," he replied, wincing. "Hurts like blazes, but I've had worse." Willa tore strips from her petticoat to create a temporary bandage, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "You promised we'd face danger together, then immediately tried to shield me from it." A pained smile touched his lips. "Old habits won't happen again. See that it doesn't." She finished binding his wound, then leaned forward to press her forehead against his. "Don't you dare die on me, Isaac Blackwood. We have a wedding in 3 weeks. Wouldn't miss it," he promised weakly, "though I may need help with the dancing." Richard Coleman watched their exchange with contemptuous disbelief. "This is what you chose over the life I offered, a bleeding lawman in a dying mining town." Willa turned to face him, pity replacing fear in her expression. "I chose love freely given over ownership disguised as opportunity. I chose a man who believed me without question over one who saw me as property to be controlled." She took Isaac's hand in hers. "I chose correctly." Coleman's response was cut short by the arrival of townsfolk, miners and shopkeepers and ranchers come to assist Walter in transporting the prisoner. They regarded Coleman with cold disdain as they hauled him roughly to his feet. "Easy with him," Isaac instructed, despite his pain. "He faces territorial justice, not frontier justice." "More's the pity," muttered a burly miner, though he loosened his grip slightly. The doctor arrived shortly thereafter, clucking disapprovingly at Isaac's wound before declaring it serious but not life-threatening. "Bed rest for at least a week. No arguments, deputy." As Coleman was led away and Isaac transferred to a makeshift stretcher, Willa surveyed the scene, the smoldering town behind them, the blackened schoolhouse frame, the blood-stained snow where Isaac had fallen. So much destruction wrought by one man's obsessive pride and entitlement. Yet amid the devastation, she recognized something unexpected: the foundations of genuine strength. Not the false power Richard Coleman had wielded through money and intimidation, but the authentic strength of a community united in protection of its own. "We'll rebuild," Belle said, returning to stand beside her as if reading her thoughts. "The mercantile, the schoolhouse, all of it. Whispering Creek endures." "Yes," Willa agreed, watching Isaac being carefully loaded onto a wagon for transport to the doctor's house. "We endure." February dawned clear and cold, with sunlight gleaming on pristine snow that blanketed Whispering Creek. The rebuilding had begun immediately after the fire's townsfolk working together to repair damaged structures before winter's worst arrived. The hotel and mercantile already stood restored, and the new schoolhouse foundation had been laid, awaiting spring for completion. Richard Coleman and his hired men had been transported to Denver under heavy guard to face multiple charges: arson, attempted murder, corruption, and assault. Marshal Wilson's telegrams reported the territorial governor's personal interest in ensuring justice was served without influence or interference, in Willa's small room behind Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house, a temporary arrangement until the schoolhouse quarters were rebuilt. Belle fussed with the simple white dress they'd ordered from Denver. "Something borrowed," she said, fastening her own mother's pearl earrings to Willa's ears. "Something blue." A ribbon threaded through the simple bouquet of hothouse flowers Walter Jenkins had ordered specially. "You look beautiful," Belle declared, stepping back to admire her work. "Isaac will be speechless." Willa gazed at her reflection in the small mirror. The bruised, frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 8 months ago was unrecognizable in the confident bride who looked back at her. Her eyes were clear, her expression serene, her posture straight with hard-won dignity. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted softly. "After everything with my father, then Richard, I believed that kind of happiness wasn't meant for me." Belle squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the longest journeys lead to the best destinations." A knock at the door announced Walter Jenkins, who had volunteered to escort Willa to the church in his finest suit, his weathered face beaming with paternal pride. "Ladies, the Reverend's getting fidgety and Isaac looks like he might wear a hole in the floorboards with his pacing." The small church overflowed with well-wishers. Every resident of Whispering Creek appeared to have crowded into the whitewashed building. As Willa entered on Walter's arm, faces turned, smiles bloomed, and a collective sigh of appreciation rippled through the gathering. At the altar, Isaac waited tall and handsome in a new black suit, his left arm still carried carefully due to his healing wound. When he saw her, his expression transformed with such transparent joy that Willa's breath caught in her throat. Their vows were simple, traditional promises of love, honor, and faithfulness spoken with quiet certainty. When Isaac placed his grandmother's ring on her finger permanently, his hands were steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Reverend Porter intoned, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Deputy." Isaac's kiss was gentle yet promising a beginning rather than culmination. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic. The celebration afterward filled the rebuilt hotel's dining room tables groaning with potluck contributions, fiddle music inspiring impromptu dancing, children darting between adults with excited energy. Toasts flowed freely, ranging from Walter's gruff sentimentality to Belle's barely contained tears of happiness. As evening approached, Isaac found Willa by the window, watching snowflakes begin to fall in the deepening twilight. "Happy?" he asked softly, his arm circling her waist. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe it's real." "Which part? That Coleman's facing justice, that the town survived his vengeance, or that you married a battered old deputy with more scars than social graces?" She turned to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "That I found someone who believed me without question when I needed it most. That believing led to understanding, understanding to friendship, friendship to love." Isaac's expression softened as he captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Believing you was the easiest decision I ever made, Willa. Everything good in my life followed from that moment." As they stood together, framed in the window's soft lamplight while snow transformed the world outside, Willa recognized the truth that had emerged from all the pain and struggle. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage aren't dramatic confrontations or physical bravery, but simply believing someone whose truth has been dismissed by others. In that belief, both believer and believed find healing neither could achieve alone. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, noting her reflective expression. "That endings become beginnings when you least expect them," she replied, "and that our story is just starting." His smile, the one reserved only for her, confirmed the promise of that new beginning. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, testing the name with evident satisfaction, "I believe you're absolutely right." 3 years later, June 1881, Willa Blackwood sat on the front porch of their whitewashed cottage, watching her 2-year-old daughter chase butterflies in the summer sunshine. The child's delighted laughter carried across the yard, a sound of such pure joy it still caught Willa's breath whenever she heard it. "Eleanor, don't go past the garden fence," she called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child, a son, according to Belle's confident prediction, would arrive before autumn's first frost. From the direction of town came the familiar silhouette of Isaac on horseback, returning from his morning patrol. In the 3 years since their marriage, he'd been promoted to full marshal after Whispering Creek was formally incorporated. The silver mines had brought increasing prosperity and population, transforming the once struggling settlement into a thriving community. "Papa," Eleanor spotted him immediately, abandoning her butterfly pursuit to race toward the gate, dark curls bouncing with each step. Isaac dismounted, scooping his daughter into a hug before leading his horse the remaining distance. "And how are my favorite ladies today?" he called, his smile as warm as the June sunshine. "Your son has been practicing his kicking," Willa replied, returning his smile. "I think we may have a future territorial football champion." Isaac secured his horse and joined them on the porch, pressing a kiss to Willa's forehead before settling beside her on the swing. Eleanor immediately climbed into his lap, small fingers reaching for his marshal's badge with perpetual fascination. "Letter came on the morning stage," he said, retrieving an envelope from his pocket. "From Denver." Willa accepted it, recognizing the territorial court's official seal. Though Richard Coleman's conviction and 20-year prison sentence had been finalized over 2 years ago, occasional communications still arrived regarding appeals or procedural matters. She opened it without the fear that such correspondence had once inspired. "The final appeal has been denied," she read aloud. "The conviction stands in all particulars. Case closed." She looked up at Isaac. "It's really over," he nodded, understanding the significance beyond the legal terminology. "Coleman will remain in territorial prison until at least 1896. By then, he'll be an old man with no remaining influence." Willa folded the letter carefully. Once, such news would have brought overwhelming relief. Now, it was merely closure on a chapter long since set aside. Richard Coleman had become increasingly irrelevant to her life, a shadow diminished by the brightness that had followed. "Mama, story," Eleanor requested, abandoning her father's badge to climb into Willa's lap, careful of her mother's pregnant belly as Isaac had taught her. "Which one, sweetheart?" "The Princess and the Brave Knight," came the immediate reply, her current favorite, despite having heard it countless times. Willa smiled, meeting Isaac's gaze over their daughter's head. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a princess who had to flee her castle because a wicked lord wanted to keep her prisoner." As she continued the tale, their own story transformed into fairy tale appropriate for young ears. She marveled at how thoroughly her life had changed since that blood-streaked sunset when she'd first arrived in Whispering Creek. The frightened, wounded woman who stepped from the stagecoach could never have imagined the future awaiting her: a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, another child on the way, and a community that had embraced her completely. "And they lived happily ever after," she concluded as Eleanor's eyelids drooped with approaching nap time. "Forever and ever," Isaac added softly, his hand finding Willa's as their daughter drifted to sleep between them. Willa squeezed his fingers, heart full beyond measure. "I believe we will," she whispered. "I truly believe we will." And in that belief, so freely given, so completely earned, lay the greatest truth of all. That sometimes the most powerful words in any language are simply, "I believe you," spoken by someone whose faith transforms doubt into certainty, fear into courage, and isolation into belonging. The summer breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across their porch as Whispering Creek bustled with activity in the valley below. Clouds drifted across the Colorado sky, casting alternating patterns of sunlight and shadow across the landscape that had become home. They sat together in contented silence, holding their sleeping daughter, awaiting their unborn son, and embracing the future that had begun with 3 simple words spoken by a deputy marshal to a wounded stranger on a dusty frontier street. "I believe you."